Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Spots from Impact Travel, Greater Seattle, and I'm joined by my co-leads, Barrett Chapman, Celestina Hendrickson, and Kaitlyn Brajcich. And I want to thank my team for organizing this event today, which I'm excited to learn more about too. Impact Travel Alliance is a 501(c) and based in New York, and it's a global community aimed at improving the world through travel. And as you're entering, feel free to say where you're joining us today. We're actually, we have 400 people registered, which we're very excited about. Impact Travel Alliance represents the largest community for social and economic travelers, and there are more than 20 chapters around the world. Our local chapters, through our local chapters, we host events like this to help travelers explore in a way that has a positive impact on local communities and our environment. Our events are designed to help travelers understand how to travel sustainably anywhere. Our goal is to provide travelers with the resources and tools they need to book travel experience in confidence and that they're having a positive impact in our world. Our own chapter in Greater Seattle is actually looking for more members to help put on educational events such as this, and we'll chat more about that at the end today. So today we're chatting about this very important topic of carbon offsetting. And we have actually, before I introduce our speakers, just a quick poll for the audience. And Celestina, if you want to turn the poll on, I thank you. And give everyone a minute to answer the poll, and we'll show you the result in just a minute, or just a few seconds. All right, I think we can shut the poll down and see what we have. All right, well, impressive. So thank you for voting, everyone. So today I'm delighted to introduce our speakers, and both from Sustainable Travel International. And I'll turn that poll off there. So Paloma, actually let me flash to the screen here. Paloma Zapata is CEO of Sustainable Travel International, and we're delighted to have her here today. As CEO, she leads the organization's global efforts to maximize tourism's contribution to conservation and development in order to protect destinations, preserve natural environments, and improve community well-being. Her work has ranged from addressing shortcomings of current tourism supply to deriving sustainable development strategies and formulating policies for destinations. With over 15 years of experience in sustainable tourism and economic development, Paloma has designed and implemented impactful initiatives and projects in 25 nations across the world. That's so impressive. Currently, she leads the organization's carbon offsetting program and is leading the efforts in defining the first carbon neutral destination approach for island nations to follow. Thank you for being here today, Paloma. And then Kaitlyn Brajcich, one of our Chapter Alliance team members, Impact Travel Alliance, Greater Seattle, is Senior Manager of Communications and Training for Sustainable Travel International. A purpose-driven optimist, Kaitlyn possesses a particular passion for using communication and education to inspire meaningful change. Kaitlyn is currently the Senior Manager in Training for Sustainable Travel International. In this role, she raises awareness around sustainable issues affecting people, places, and nature, and promotes best practices in tourism. Kaitlyn, thank you so much for organizing this today, and I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Actually, Paloma is going to go ahead
and
begin.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to stop sharing mine.
Well, thank you. We are very excited to be here with Impact Travel Alliance Seattle. And before we dive into carbon offsetting, just wanted to first introduce who Sustainable Travel International is. For those of you who don't know us. So Sustainable Travel International, we're a very small nonprofit with very big ambitions. We are focused on protecting and conserving our planet's most vulnerable destinations. Since our founding in 2002, we've worked to transform tourism impact on nature and people. We know that reducing tourism negative impact and maximizing its positive benefits on communities and environments, that travel can be a powerful force for good. We've worked in over 100 destinations across the world, from tropical islands to high mountain towns, to coastal areas, to protected areas. Throughout our work, we partner with many destinations that have fragile environments, vulnerable communities, and that are highly dependent on the tourism industry. So you can see here the vast, work that we've done. So we've definitely crossed, borders, across different regions of the world. So what are our priorities? We're taking on tourism's most pressing and transformative impacts and working towards a future that is beneficial for people and places across the world. So our priorities are to guide these destinations in safeguarding their fragile ecosystems and wildlife ecosystems and their nature. We're also working on combating climate change, such as working with industry and with travelers to reduce their carbon footprint. We also work to empower communities, to celebrate communities. Instead of creating leakages, but we create opportunities for communities to link to the tourism value chain and actually reap the benefits and celebrate their culture. And we're also working with destinations to tackle and reduce their waste and pollution that results from the tourism activity. So how do we create change? We accomplish this in a number of different ways by providing guidance to governments and local leaders to help them implement policies and solutions that lead to healthier destinations. We work alongside communities to ensure tourism is meeting their needs. We also engage businesses and travelers to adopt more sustainable practices and contribute to the well-being of those host communities and environments that tourism depends on. One specific way that we're doing this is by helping individuals and businesses reduce their reliance on fossil fuels by creating more efficiencies in their operations, and also by offsetting their carbon, because there comes a moment where you can't reduce the carbon footprint, but you can offset, and it creates a virtuous cycle if you do this. So this is what we're going to focus on today. So our experience, we have more than 15 years of experience working in carbon offsetting. We were one of the first to bring carbon offsetting mechanism to the tourism industry. So here you can see a few of the companies that we worked with along the way. Many of them are tour operators. They're international tour operators. They can create a large carbon footprint as they're flying people all over the world, and they have created sustainability agendas that include carbon offsetting and working with us. So now I would like to give it to Kaitlyn to actually take us through tourism and climate change. So I will stop sharing. And
Great. Yep. All right, you can see it. All right, so yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about tourism's connection to climate change. So first of all, in order to understand this connection, we really need to see what's happened to the tourism industry and travel in recent years, or really see, how it's grown over the years. So in this graph, you can see really how it's skyrocketed over the last 2 decades. In fact, international tourism arrivals have actually doubled over this time period, reaching 1.4 billion international tourist arrivals in 2019. Of course, the COVID pandemic has brought this growth to a halt over the past year. However, we know, this was a temporary pause and people are going to begin to travel again. And, as more and more people have really been traveling, they leave behind a greater impact on the planet, both positive and negative. One of these impacts, of course, is those carbon emissions that are generated by travel. As more and more people are traveling, particularly as people were traveling internationally and, taking those long plane flights, tourism really came under heightened scrutiny for its contribution to the climate emergency. We began hearing terms such as flight shaming as people began becoming more aware of their impact. And, we do have to acknowledge tourism does play a role in the climate crisis. There's no denying that. In fact, a 2018 study found that tourism accounts for 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. There are a number of different ways that you produce carbon when you travel. Essentially anything that requires energy will lead to carbon emissions unless this energy is coming from 100% renewable clean sources, which is simply just not the case right now. While we aren't going to dive super deep into every single activity that generates carbon during this webinar, we'll touch upon a few of the most common culprits as well as some that you may not have maybe realized. So the most obvious carbon generating activity, of course, is plane travel, especially those long haul flights. In fact, a one-way flight from London to New York, it actually generates about the same amount of emissions that the average person in Zimbabwe generates over an entire year. So not a small footprint, right? Other modes of transportation burn fuel as well, of course, and also contribute to your trip's carbon footprint, be it a car or a boat or, train or a bus. And then, in the same way that your house generates emissions from energy use, so do the hotels, homestays, rental homes, and other accommodations that you're staying in while on vacation. This is because, the heating and air conditioning systems that keep your room comfortable, they create carbon emissions, as do those water heaters that are warming up your shower water and pool water, electricity that's being used to power lights, TVs, refrigerators, and other equipment is also another contributor to that footprint. And then, some of the less obvious ways that your trip creates carbon. The first is all of that delicious food that you're eating. We often don't necessarily think about all that is involved in getting, the food that we consume from farm to table. Things like growing, processing it, transporting it, packaging, refrigerating, cooking, right? All of these different steps require different types of energy and can contribute to your meal's carbon footprint. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm on vacation, I love to try all the local cuisine, and it can be pretty easy to overindulge. Those all-you-can-eat buffets, oversized restaurant portions, they really don't help much either. So inevitably, a lot of this food, it ends up getting thrown away. This wastage of food is an issue for two different reasons. All of those emissions that were generated by its production, well, that means they were unnecessary. And then secondly, when this food decomposes in landfill, it creates methane, which is another harmful greenhouse gas. And then another thing to keep in mind is that in many destinations, a lot of the food and other products, souvenirs, that they're actually imported from other countries. This is particularly the case in remote island destinations. The Caribbean and Pacific Islands, for instance, they actually import over 60% of their food from overseas. And so, the farther that a product travels to reach its final destination, the more emissions that are generated by all these different, activities along the way. And then, the final way, which, is one of those ones that we don't often think about is, tourism also emits carbon, through the clearing of natural ecosystems such as forests or mangroves along, beaches, which act as carbon sinks by absorbing and restoring carbon. When this vegetation is removed to construct resorts, build piers, or clear beaches, it releases this carbon back into the atmosphere. All of these emissions, of course, contribute to global climate change. As the climate changes, we'll see a wide range of impacts in all different types of destinations. In fact, many of these impacts are already happening. Tropical storms, droughts, and other extreme weather events, they're getting worse and causing more destruction. Wildfires and food and water shortages are becoming more common. A rise in sea temperatures has created less hospitable oceans, resulting in bleached coral and harm to marine life. Coastal flooding is damaging homes, hotels, and even causing, some islands to start disappearing underwater. Even mountainous regions are affected by declining snowfall levels, which could lead, ski resorts to become a thing of the past. All over the world, climate change is really affecting, people, wildlife, and places that tourism depends on. But this doesn't mean that we should swear off traveling altogether. Over the past year, we've really seen the devastating consequences of what happens when tourism comes to a halt. Travel, it's an indispensable tool for sustainable development all around the world, and it's a powerful force for positive change. It can advance conservation and environmental appreciation. It creates jobs for communities and stimulates economic growth. It promotes cultural exchange and heritage conservation. You know, the list of benefits does go on and on. So rather than cutting out travel altogether, we should actively strive to be climate conscious travelers and to do what we can to minimize our carbon footprint. First and foremost, by reducing the emissions that we generate by adopting more sustainable practices, and then by offsetting any remaining emissions that we can't reduce. There's a number of different ways you can reduce your travel emissions, you know, such as avoiding flying to nearby destinations and using more efficient modes of transportation. If you're flying, you can choose to book nonstop flights. You can pack, you know, as light as possible. There's a number of other ways you can cut your transport emissions, you know, by slowing things down, taking less trips, or staying longer in one destination. You can lessen your energy use by turning down the AC or heat in your hotel, switching off the lights, using the do not disturb sign, and by staying in eco-conscious properties. Even eating the local cuisine and reducing food waste can lower your carbon footprint. But even if you adopt all of these practices, some emissions will remain unavoidable. You can compensate for these inevitable emissions through a process called carbon offsetting, which is what we're going to be talking about more today. So though carbon offsetting, it can seem complex at first, the concept is really quite simple. It allows individuals or organizations to compensate for the carbon that they produce by reducing emissions somewhere else in the world. When you offset the same amount of emissions that you produce, you can achieve a net zero carbon footprint. In other words, you'll become carbon neutral. So you can think of it kind of like this balance scale. So how to actually go about offsetting? That's kind of the question that we need to answer, right? So here's how you do it. So first, you know, here we have an infographic that we created to kind of break down those different steps that are involved in offsetting your carbon footprint. So first, of course, you have what we already talked about. You generate those emissions, right? Just using transportation, staying in hotels, engaging in other travel activities. Then you would calculate the carbon footprint of your trip to see how much you need to offset. Once you know this, you can then purchase carbon offsets equivalent to the amount of CO2 that you produced. And then the money from your carbon offset contribution will fund projects around the world that reduce carbon and other greenhouse gases. We'll discuss each of these steps in more detail in the following slides. So before you offset, you need to know how much carbon has been emitted by your trip. This amount is known as a carbon footprint. There are a number of different factors that determine the footprint of each activity. The amount of carbon emitted per person during a flight, for example, can depend on the distance, the type of aircraft, the passenger occupancy rates, etc. Oftentimes, all of this information isn't readily available. So that's why we use internationally recognized emissions factors, which are calculated averages that account for most of these elements. So let's pretend now that I've taken a 7-night trip from Seattle to Amsterdam. While I was there, I stayed in a 4-star hotel and I rented a Fiat Panda for a day trip to Bruges. Here you can see the carbon footprint of each of these different activities. And then in total, when you add them up, the trip generated 5,187 pounds of CO2. To put that into perspective, that's equivalent to the amount of CO2 emitted from powering a home for about 5 months. While multiple activities contribute to the carbon footprint of your trip, as you can see here, it's most important to offset your flights because these make up the vast majority of the carbon emissions from a trip if you're flying. There are a number of online calculators that you can use to calculate your carbon footprint. Today, I'm going to be walking you through an example using the calculator that we have on our website, which allows you to calculate the footprint of your flight. So let's continue using our example of our trip from Seattle to Amsterdam. Before you'd use the calculator, you would first need to determine the distance of that flight. So you can use a website such as the one that we've shown here, airmilescalculator.com, to calculate this. As you can see, all you have to do is enter your departure and arrival airports, and it will calculate the flight distance for you. In this case, this distance comes to 4,886 miles. One thing to keep in mind is that this is just the calculation for a one-way flight. If you would like to offset a round-trip flight, then you would double the distance. So here our round-trip flight between Seattle and Amsterdam would be a total of 9,772 miles. And the distance calculator also provides options to add in additional airports if you have multiple legs to your trip. So now that you've determined your flight distance, then you can just head over to the carbon calculator on our website. and input the correct information. And then by clicking calculate my footprint, I can see how much CO2 I was responsible for. There are other online calculators that can be used to calculate the emissions for other modes of transportation, such as driving. Currently calculating the footprint of your hotel stay, excursions, and other travel activities online is a bit challenging since there are so many different factors that can come into play. But as we said before, when it comes to offsetting, it's really the flights that will make up the bulk of your carbon footprint. So it's most important to focus on accounting for those. This calculator is for independent travelers such as yourselves, but if you do happen to be an organization such as a tour operator or hotel, we do conduct comprehensive carbon footprint assessments that account for some of those more specific elements and business needs. Once you know your carbon footprint, the next step is to offset it. There are a number of different organizations that sell carbon offsets. Later on in this presentation, we'll talk about some of the things to look for when choosing an offset provider. If you use our calculator, you'll be given the option to offset your footprint directly on our website immediately after calculating it. There are also some airlines, tour operators, and hotels that will offset your carbon footprint for you, or that give you the option to offset on their website or directly during the booking process. So to figure out, if a company is offsetting, you can check their website or ask them directly. If they're not offsetting, then doing so, may help to encourage them to consider that. When you're doing this and researching it, pay attention to which activities they offset for to see if they do account for those international flights. And then, the other way is actually some destinations are now actually also starting to launch their own carbon offsetting programs that are based on local emissions data and allow travelers to offset their entire trip online. At Sustainable Travel International, we're planning to build a carbon neutral network of destinations who have these types of programs in place, so keep an eye out for those in the future. So one of the questions we often get is how much does it cost to offset? So the exact cost to offset, it can actually vary greatly between projects based on a number of different factors. For example, one forestry project might only cost $8 per metric ton to offset, while a wind project could be $20 per metric ton. It really can vary. So what we try to do is we try to simplify this by using an average of $12 per metric ton of CO2 when you offset via our website. So for instance, if you were to offset that round trip flight from Seattle to Amsterdam using our calculator, it would cost you less than $30. So now that you've offset your carbon footprint, you might be thinking, where do those dollars go? And how does this actually lead to emissions reductions? So your money is invested in carbon offset projects that reduce carbon and other types of greenhouse gases. The projects do this either by removing existing carbon from the atmosphere or by preventing new emissions from happening. There are three main types of carbon offset projects: forestry projects, energy projects, and blue carbon projects. Forestry projects protect or restore forest ecosystems because trees, they have the ability to absorb and store CO2. These projects play a vital role in reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Energy projects, on the other hand, reduce fossil fuel use by generating clean, renewable energy or by increasing energy efficiency. Finally, blue carbon projects protect important coastal ecosystems such as peatlands, seagrass, and mangroves, which store substantial amounts of carbon. But because these blue carbon projects are a newer development, there are less of them out there right now. Carbon offset projects can also create benefits that go beyond emissions reductions. For instance, projects may contribute to wildlife conservation by safeguarding the habitats and natural resources that endangered species depend on. They can also support local communities by creating jobs, protecting indigenous land rights, and livelihoods, or improving hygiene. At Sustainable Travel International, we handpick the carbon offset projects that we support to ensure they are creating meaningful and diverse benefits. Additionally, we make sure that all of the projects contribute to sustainability at a global level by selecting projects that align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. Those are the little boxes here for those who haven't seen those, which aim to address global inequalities and challenges by 2030. Now, I can say all this, but I find that it actually helps to look at some of the actual projects to better understand how this actually all works in practice. So on the next slides, I'll just share a few examples of some of the actual projects that our carbon offset program supports. So the first project is a forestry project called Jari Para Red Plus. This project is safeguarding an ecological corridor within the Amazon rainforest. It's home to more than 100 endangered species. The surrounding area around the project has experienced extensive deforestation as forests have been cleared to graze cattle or develop infrastructure. And so the project really is aiming to avoid further deforestation in the region by working with local communities there to mitigate damaging land use practices such as slash and burn agriculture, for instance, while also promoting sustainable food production. The project also helps to maintain a seedling nursery of native plant species from the area, which will be used to restore degraded lands. And species such as Brazil nuts and acai berries will also provide food security and can be distributed by local communities for economic gain. The project will avoid more than 100,000 acres of deforestation, and every year more than 500,000 metric tons of CO2 will be reduced. At the bottom of the slide here, you can see the different SDGs that this project supports. Note that many projects, including this one, they provide training and capacity building skills to local communities to really increase their knowledge and equip them with new skills. The next project is a wind farm located here in the USA in Oklahoma. 66 wind turbines are at the wind farm, and they'll deliver enough renewable energy to power more than 45,000 homes. By generating clean wind energy, the project reduces reliance on those damaging fossil fuels and avoids the CO2 emissions. More than 130 people were employed to construct the wind farm, and its ongoing operation will support additional local jobs. The wind farm also provides an additional revenue stream for the local farmers who are paid to host the turbines on their property. And here's another example of a project that's slightly different approach, the Cambodia water filter project. It provides access to clean drinking water for 1.7 million rural villagers by providing them with these clean water filters. Without the filters, the families, they have to collect firewood to boil the water to make it clean enough to drink, which releases carbon dioxide and generates pollution inside the home, which also causes health issues. With these water filters, they have direct access to clean drinking water, so they no longer need to burn the wood fuel indoors. And it prevents CO2 emissions while also reducing pressure on Cambodia's forest resources and improving that indoor air quality for these families. The final project that we'll look at today is a blue carbon project that is conserving mangrove forests along Kenya's southern coast. Studies show that pound for pound mangrove forests sequester 4 times more carbon than rainforests. So when these mangroves, when they're destroyed, this carbon is of course all released into the atmosphere. Over the past few decades, Kenya's mangroves have been over-harvested, primarily for building materials. And in addition to storing carbon, these mangroves, they actually serve as really important habitats for fish. So their loss has led to declining fish stocks, which are a vital source of income and food for the local communities. The project is protecting Kenya's remaining mangroves by educating locals on their importance, improving monitoring and enforcement, and providing alternative wood sources. Along with conserving existing forests, the project is restoring degraded mangrove sites as well. And then, an additional community benefit is that the funds generated from the carbon offset purchases are channeled into different community development initiatives, including supplying clean water and renovating classrooms. So now Paloma is going to talk a little bit about what to think about when choosing a carbon offset provider.
Well, as I do this, I just want to say that I'm very excited that so many people from across the world are joining, and there's so much dynamic conversation. We're going to answer your questions at the end, and we will also provide our contact details if you want to contact us later. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. There's been a lot of, in the recent years, there's been a lot of negative press around carbon offsetting, really diminishing the efforts of the carbon offsetting mechanism. So they speak at how customers have been ripped off, and some projects are not really offsetting emissions at all. There are reports that they're basically taking money away from people, and that tree planting is not really effective because they can die because of drought, fire, other natural disasters, human intervention. So this used to be the case. However, because it was an unregulated mechanism, But now there are rigorous standards in place that you need to look out and watch out for in projects that you want to support with your carbon offsetting. First of all, though, not all projects are created equal. So we do recommend to stay clear of projects that promote solely tree planting. It is difficult to prove the permanence of these newly planted trees because they do little to really change our reliance on fossil fuels. But yet there are other projects, such as Kaitlyn was explaining, that have a lot of community benefits that change the way we actually interact with nature to actually be able to conserve these ecosystems that are so important to sequestering carbon. So that's the first project that you should stay away from. However, you should also look for third-party verified standards, as all the projects that we work with are verified and are audited by these particular standards that you see here on the screen. Some of them have reached multiple accreditations through these standards, and they look at various different things to validate. So 99% of all projects on the voluntary carbon market adhere to these projects. These third-party verifiers, they set strict criteria and an auditing process. Such thing as social and environmental impact assessment must be completed, and it must measure the amount of carbon that these particular projects are actually going to sequester, which is a very rigorous, very scientific process. It can take a project up to 2 years to actually get certified, and it could cost them between $200,000 to $400,000 US dollars to actually receive these certifications. So it's important that any project that you are going to support is third-party verified, and then you really can avoid the issues that had been raised previously by the media before. So what do they look for? So these particular third-party verified mechanisms, they look for the concept of additionality. This means that the benefits that this project is giving will not occur without the financial support of carbon credits. They also help to make sure that there's no leakages. So for example, if a project stops illegal logging in an area, it makes sure that it's not just going to move illegal logging 10 miles away. That is actually a comprehensive changing, the way communities are interacting with these particular spaces. It also talks about the concept of permanence. This means that carbon is not just going to be released into the air in a later stage, but actually might be very difficult to prove, especially in forestry projects. But because these projects are often, politically in unstable countries, or, agendas may change, things may change in this area. But the standards do assure that these carbon reduction projects are actually meeting the criteria that they're putting in place. And the life cycle of these projects are usually between 20 to 30 years. So they're very long projects. So again, it's an important investment in the beginning of a project between, like I said, 200 to 400,000, but they're very long lasting projects. And they start working with this mechanism, which is the carbon credits mechanism. So of course, these projects have to, on a yearly basis, they have to publish how much carbon credits they're actually going to sequester with their agenda for the year. And they can only sell that amount of credits. So sometimes projects do run out. They run out of credits in the middle of the year if they actually reach their financial goals to meet their objective for that year. So it's also very important to again, make sure that it's third-party verified, the projects that you are supporting. One thing that they do not do is actually regulate pricing. So pricing can vary. It varies greatly depending on the type of project. A renewable energy project in India may cost a lot less than a blue carbon project. Very different types of projects. So not only in itself, the credits, the pricing of the project varies, but also because of this mechanism, it's actually a carbon trade. So it goes again by the economics, depending on how much they're actually selling out in the in the world, the prices may fluctuate greatly. As they're running out of credits, they have a lot of supporters, their prices may actually go up slightly. So it varies somewhat. So when you're trying to select an organization to support with your carbon offset, what you should be looking for, you really need to research and not just trust anybody that's out there. There's a lot of new entrants in this field. There's a lot of because the effects of climate change are real, and more people are waking up and really trying to do their part. So there's a lot of new entrants, again, offering this mechanism. So it's important to research who you're actually going to support through your carbon offsetting. So look for, are they actually retiring their credits? Or are they double counting? So make sure that all projects, that are listed in the registry, and offset providers can use them. They actually retire those credits that you buy. So make sure that they do that. Are they transparent? Is it a reputable organization? Well, do they have information about their projects, the methodologies that they use, quality assurance protocols on their website? Are they willing to answer questions? Just look for, are they actually publishing the methodologies and the factors that they are using? It's important to understand, to really do your homework. Do the projects go beyond carbon offsetting? Like I was saying before, don't just rely on tree planting. Look for projects like we actually, curate the projects that we support. Projects that have a community benefit. They go beyond just carbon credits. They actually support communities, clean water filters, for example. Restoring mangroves. They're super important to protect, the areas around in a community that is vulnerable to the effects of hurricanes, for example. And also we recommend, if we're going to go for an organization, is it an organization a for-profit or a nonprofit organization? We are a nonprofit organization, so we are altruistic. So there are many organizations out there that are for-profit, and they're mainly tailored for big industry, but you can also offset with them. So that's also an important component. Do they have experience in carbon offsetting? Are they a new entrant in this field? It's also looking to see if they have, again, if they are reliable in this space. So are they going to encourage climate action beyond just carbon offsetting? Do they offer advice on how to reduce your carbon footprint? This actually tells you that, these organizations are implied. They're not just looking to benefit from this mechanism, but they're actually implied in supporting, our crisis, in reducing our climate crisis. And so are they educating their partners, clients, and members about facts about climate change? Knowledge sharing is vital in this particular space. It's not enough just to do the carbon offsetting. The first thing that we need to do is reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, support organizations that are doing this. You can also support new innovations in cleaner jet fuels, for example. So it's important. What we do is actually support the sector in first reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, or first decarbonize, localize their supply chains, and then what they cannot do, they can offset, and they can communicate that to their clients. So why is it important? Why is it important to do carbon offsetting now more than ever? Well, and the effects of COVID has been extensive in our lives, of course, but it's also been it has an important effect on conservation work and the protection of the environments in these ecosystems that sequester carbon that we really need. So the absence of ecotourism, for example, because of this pandemic, has made many parks vulnerable and many communities vulnerable. So you've seen an increased amount of poaching in these areas, an increased amount of logging in these areas. So funding these conservation programs are continuously important, particularly in this phase. However, climate emergency is the next big threat. It's real, and it's something that we really need to do something about. So again, the first thing is reduce reliance on fossil fuels. The next thing is what you cannot reduce, then really contemplate carbon offsetting from your trips, for example, as we are doing, we're talking about today. However, the next big thing is there actually new technology that's coming out. Besides reducing your carbon emissions and supporting these conservation efforts, there's actually new technology that are going to help us even in the future to reduce the amount of carbon in the air. And this is needed in this space, again, because we're in a climate crisis. So new technologies such as direct air capture is coming about, is not yet traded as a carbon mechanism, but they do capture and they harness heat. They harness CO2 from the air, similar the way trees are doing it in our programs. And from there, the CO2 can be stored into these rocks or deep underground, where they can make into durable material, including displacement of emission-intensive components such as cement. And they can also be recycled to made into carbon neutral fuels. So this is all very new technology, and that we are continuously looking for in our organization. And as well, we are looking at other technologies, for example, of removing carbon within the ocean, which creates the carbon acidity that is also polluting our oceans and killing our ecosystems, our ocean ecosystems. So it's also important to keep abreast of what else is happening, because these new technologies will be important in the conversation when we're looking at the climate crisis. So with this, we leave you this additional page with a lot of resources that you can look at. We continuously put out and educate consumers about what is climate offsetting, what is blue carbon ecosystems, how to reduce your carbon emissions. We're constantly putting resources out there for you to be able to continuously be abreast of what's out there and how to be a more responsible and sustainable traveler. So with that said, I leave it now for question and answer. And yeah, looking forward for this conversation, continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Paloma and Kaitlyn. And Celestina, my colleague from Impact Travel Greater Seattle, will be fielding some questions. Celestina, do you want to share a couple of them with us?
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. The first question that we are going to ask here is from Amar. Are carbon credits the same as carbon offsetting?
Is carbon credits the same as carbon offsetting? Yes, so the carbon credit is the amount of metric tons that you end up buying. So carbon offsetting is the mechanism, and then carbon credits is the metric tons that you end up buying.
Okay, thank you. And then also this question is from Gosia. It says, do third parties also verify the calculation method or only the offsetting project?
So they verify the calculation methods of the actual project. So basically they have to, for a project to get to get audited or verified, they need to be able to prove that with the work that they're doing, this is the amount of credits or the amount of metric tons of CO2 that they're going to sequester. So all that calculation, which is quite important and scientific, that's what they verify. When it comes to the calculations of those that are actually having the calculator of your own carbon footprint, they are not verifying that. No, it would not be those particular organizations that we mentioned.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, I just wanted to mention that the verification, they must do, a whole documentation at the beginning to really validate this project. And then there's verification that continues over time, and monitoring that continues over time to ensure that, what they're saying is actually happening. And even beyond the CO2 emissions, those other benefits, the community benefits and the other environmental benefits that they're talking about, that those also, are happening as well.
Great, thank you. And then this next question is from Erica. Is there a particularly reliable calculator that you use for calculating carbon for ground travel?
for ground travel. So for your car and train, there's so many out there. And it's important to know that the actual carbon emission of any activity that you do, it varies greatly. It varies by the model of your car. It varies, yeah, so again, the type of car the model of your car, and even the way you drive. So for example, it's really about, how much gas you're consuming, no? So if you're driving uphill, you're going to consume more gas than if you're driving, on a flat line. Same with the jet, same with your flight. It's going to vary greatly. If you have a short haul flight, you're going to have higher emission than if you do per mile, for example, or per kilometer, than if you do on a long haul flight, because it gets more efficient. So the reality is that to be, super accurate, it has to be per particular plane or activity. But there are international factors out there that have averages as far as commercial planes or charter planes, or your ocean flights and your trucking and all the different kinds of cars. So there are international factors out there, which is what we use. I know it's a long-winded answer, but I wanted to say these little details because I thought it was important to say that there's a lot of variation here. However, as far as transportation, there are a few out there. I can't really name a specific one that I would say is more reliable than the other, but you can even go to sometimes even car makes. If you go to the car manufacturing, you can see they can actually publish what their emission factors is. So that will be the most reliable. And then you have the aggregators that will take all that information out there.
Thank you. Celestina, I know we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, definitely. There is one, this one is from Ursula. What's the biggest blocker for sustainable travel for customers today?
The biggest blocker. What is
That's
that?
a big question.
Yeah, like what is like, there's different types of travelers. There are travelers who still seek let's say, more of a price-oriented traveler, rather a more experiential travel. But we're seeing a lot more experiential travel, people that are more in tune with their experiences and what the impact that they're going to leave behind. And this is what we need. We need more people who are more aware of what they're doing. They're not just looking, to go and tick a box and they just go to one place and look for the cheapest way of doing that. We need people that, are actually going to go out and travel for a different experience and a different purpose. And they're more responsible and conscious about what they're doing. And this is in everything that we do, not just in travel. And I think that's the biggest blocker right now is really, consciousness in what it is that we're doing and why it is that we're doing and what is the impact that we're doing behind. So it's really a mindset shift that we continuously see grow, but it's not yet mainstream. We would love to see, tourism, sustainable tourism just be tourism, for the industry to really just change the way they do things and for the travelers themselves to do that.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Manuel. Is there a platform to access credible certified offset projects that you know of?
Well, if you go to each one of these, every one of those auditors have a registry, so you can actually look up every project. That doesn't mean that you can actually buy their credits because you can't do it through their system, but you can actually look at their registry. And you can look at all the methodologies and all the documentation and in what stage they're in actually, if they are just, submitted or they're actually operating or they're closed. So every single registry or third-party verifier will have a registry.
Yeah, and just to also say, when you are looking at, a carbon offset provider, they should be saying, for each project that they are supporting, if what standard that project adheres to. So like, for instance, if you go on our website and you can look at each of the projects that are in our portfolio and you'll see which standards those adhere to. So just, you know, when you're looking for that, you'll be able to tell which organizations are choosing projects that adhere to those standards as well.
Thank you so much, Paloma and Kaitlyn, and to Sustainable Travel International. Unfortunately, our time is winding down, and I'm so impressed by the interest and so delighted that we have so many people here today. And we do have many more events, but I wanted to invite people, travelers, to participate in Impact Travel Alliance's challenge for this month to help remove carbon from our Earth's atmosphere. We actually, Kelly Louise put something, a link to tomorrow's air in the chat, and we invite you to do that. This is our theme. Our month, every month we have a theme, and our month, this month is Protect Our Planet. We have several more events along this topic coming up, and there are some other links in the chat here as well. On April 13th, the Savvy Traveler's Guide to Going Green, and then on April 22nd, Water Warriors, how travelers can advocate for ocean conservation, and then a traveler meetup about climate justice later in the month. And as an event attendee, you'll be registered for our newsletter if you already are not receiving it, the Impact Travel Alliance newsletter, and all of these events will be in that newsletter. And if you are interested, we would love to have anyone from the greater Seattle area join our chapter to put on more events to inspire travelers to travel with more sustainably and consciously. So thank you again, Kaitlyn and Paloma, and we'll be sending these slides out in the next newsletter. And everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.